The ceasefire is over. Both sides are claiming violations. Negotiations are described as stalled. And somewhere in Kyiv, Volodymyr Zelenskyy is facing the most complex diplomatic position any wartime leader has navigated since Winston Churchill in 1940. I'm Victor Smith. This is The Verdict. Let me tell you what is actually happening in Ukraine, stripped of the optimism bias that infects most Western coverage and the cynicism that renders most Russian commentary useless. The 3-day ceasefire that Trump announced and Putin endorsed has expired. It produced one concrete outcome: a prisoner exchange that returned real human beings to their families on both sides. That matters. Do not dismiss it. In a war that has consumed tens of thousands of lives and left eastern Ukraine in ruins, the return of prisoners is not a footnote. It is evidence that a channel of communication exists and that both sides are capable of minimal cooperation when the incentive is sufficient. Everything else about the ceasefire was theater. Russia violated it. Ukraine violated it. Both sides documented the other's violations with the efficiency of parties who expected violations and prepared the documentation in advance. The ceasefire was never a genuine pause in the conflict. It was a diplomatic choreography. Trump needed to demonstrate peace process momentum. Putin needed a humanitarian gesture that reframed his international image. And Zelenskyy needed to demonstrate cooperation with American mediation without conceding anything substantive. All three got what they needed. The war continued. The three forces bearing down on Zelenskyy simultaneously, Zelenskyy's position is worth examining carefully because it is genuinely unprecedented in modern diplomatic history, and the coverage consistently underestimates its complexity. He is simultaneously managing three forces pulling in directly contradictory directions. Force 1, military reality. The front lines are essentially frozen. Ukraine has demonstrated extraordinary resilience and tactical ingenuity. The drone campaign against Russian energy infrastructure is a strategic achievement that has imposed real costs on Moscow's war economy. But the fundamental territorial position has not materially shifted in months. Ukraine controls roughly 4/5 of its pre-2022 territory. Russia controls the rest and shows no sign of voluntarily relinquishing it in any negotiation that doesn't extract significant concessions from Kyiv. Force 2, American impatience. Trump's attention has always been finite and transactional. The Iran war has consumed American diplomatic and military bandwidth in ways that were not anticipated when Trump's Ukraine peace initiative launched. Trump's public backing of the ceasefire came with visible frustration, the language of a dealmaker who wants the file closed so he can move to the next transaction. American military and financial support for Ukraine, while continuing, is no longer the unconditional commitment it was under Biden. Every week that passes without progress increases the risk that Trump's impatience translates into pressure on Zelenskyy to accept terms that Ukraine's military position doesn't require it to accept. Force 3, European ambiguity. European governments publicly support Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. They continue to provide military equipment and financial assistance. But the private conversations in European capitals, and these conversations are happening, are more complicated. European energy markets are under pressure from both the Russian and Iranian theaters simultaneously. European defense budgets are being rebuilt from a dangerously low base. European publics, who have absorbed Ukrainian refugees with genuine generosity, are beginning to show the fatigue that sustained humanitarian commitments eventually produce. The gap between Europe's public position and its private appetite for a negotiated settlement is wider than the official statements suggest. What a realistic settlement looks like, and why it's agonizing, I want to be honest about something that Western commentary systematically avoids because it is politically uncomfortable. A negotiated settlement of the Ukraine war, any negotiated settlement that is achievable in the current military and diplomatic environment, will require Ukraine to accept outcomes that are profoundly unjust. Russia invaded a sovereign nation. Russia has committed documented war crimes. Russia has illegally annexed Ukrainian territory. A just outcome would require Russian withdrawal, reparations, and accountability. A realistic outcome, given the frozen front lines, American impatience, and Russian economic resilience despite sanctions, almost certainly involves Ukraine accepting some form of de facto Russian control over currently occupied territories in exchange for security guarantees, reconstruction assistance, and a path toward European integration. That is not justice. It is the brutal arithmetic of geopolitics when military stalemate meets diplomatic exhaustion. Zelenskyy knows this. His European allies know this. Trump has always known this. The gap between what Ukraine deserves and what Ukraine can achieve is the central tragedy of this war. And no amount of careful diplomatic language changes its dimensions. The upside A negotiated settlement, however imperfect, stops the killing. That is not a small thing. The human cost of this war is staggering, and every month it continues adds to a toll that is already almost incomprehensible. A settlement that includes genuine security guarantees, NATO membership, bilateral defense treaties, a tripwire deployment of European forces, can provide Ukraine with meaningful protection against future Russian aggression, even without full territorial restoration. Security matters more than maps in the long run. European reconstruction investment in Ukraine, which a settlement would unlock, is economically transformative. Ukraine's agricultural capacity, its technology sector, its human capital are all genuine assets. A secure, reconstructed Ukraine integrated into European economic structures is a net positive for the entire continent. The downside, a settlement that rewards Russian territorial aggression with de facto recognition, creates a precedent that reverberates far beyond Ukraine. Every frozen conflict on Earth, from Taiwan to the South China Sea to the Baltic, gets reanalyzed through the lens of what Russia achieved. The message to every authoritarian government considering territorial aggression is explicit. Invade, hold, wait for the defender's allies to tire, negotiate from the position your military created. The deterrence architecture that has prevented major interstate war in Europe for 8 decades takes a structural hit from which it may not recover. And Zelenskyy, who has shown personal courage and strategic intelligence that history will recognize regardless of this war's outcome, may be forced to sign an agreement that his military position doesn't require and his moral position doesn't accept. That is the agonizing human dimension of the strategic calculation. Victor's verdict. The ceasefire was theater. The war continues. But something has shifted in the underlying dynamic that the theater obscures. Russia is weaker economically than at any point since the war began. Putin's domestic position, while still strong, depends increasingly on the narrative of progress toward settlement, rather than the narrative of inevitable victory. American patience is finite and visibly thinning, and China, as we discussed yesterday, wants this war settled for its own strategic reasons and has the economic leverage over Moscow to press for it. The conditions for a negotiated settlement are forming, slowly, imperfectly, unjustly. The question is not whether a settlement comes. The question is whether Zelenskyy can hold on long enough for the terms to improve, or whether American impatience and Russian endurance force his hand before the moment is right. That is the most consequential question in European security today. I don't have the verdict yet. Nobody does. But I'll be watching, and I'll tell you the moment I do. Consequence score: high. I'm Victor Smith. That is the verdict.